This one is kind of interesting because it kind of brought down a couple of different projects with the accusation of it gave me ransomware, and it didn't. We can blame Windows for that, I think, but we'll get to the explanation as to why we think it was Windows in the first place. But wind the clock back about a few days, and if you go onto Reddit and then it looked to me like right about the same time, the same claim was made on GitHub as well, that someone had installed this really cool application thing, container thing, whatever, called Windboat. So before we get into what actually happened, Windboat is a really cool container technology that allows you to run Windows on top of Docker to run Windows apps natively on Linux. That's a mouthful, but
that's a lot. Yeah, but it's cool.
Really cool. Like this is the kind of thing, I think in their FAQ down at the very bottom, the question of, can I run Office 365? There was no explanation, just yes.
Yes.
And that, I think, is the cool stuff that happens in Linux land all the time when you have a problem to solve. And the problem to solve is, can I run Office? Can I run Photoshop? You know, the apps that everybody says, well, I'll move over to Linux when Photoshop. Well, guess what? Well, maybe not Photoshop, but Office, because I've heard that argument plenty of times.
And there's a few applications that kind of do some similar things, right? I mean, obviously, Wine has existed since the beginning of time, almost, right?
But they're emulating Linux.
It's not an emulator, though.
Right.
But
it's
then
in
there's
the name.
But then there's Bottles is also another one that kind of does some of these things. You can run some apps, Windows apps through with that.
Which is Wine with individual configuration files for the application, right? I think
so. Yes, and but it's easier to configure and whatnot too.
Yes, so and a lot of it's pre-configured. Yeah,
right. So all these things kind of make it a little easier every step of the way you go, and then obviously you've got Windboat, which is kind of new to the game, and it does some cool things, especially because it's containerized. But it still has access to your file system, and so there's you can cross the streams, if you will, and that's where I think they got into a little bit of the trouble. I think that's where some of the trouble originated.
Right. So we'll talk a little bit more about Windboat here in just a minute, but we got to get back to the drama about why this is what's interesting about this is how we learned about Windboat. Didn't know it was a thing.
We had to reverse engineer all that.
Yeah. Okay. So a few days ago, someone went onto Reddit and onto GitHub and basically made a claim that said that FreeRDP, the FreeRDP PPA, or one FreeRDP PPA in Launchpad, was serving up malware, and not just any malware, but ransomware. So someone had gone around installing a few FreeRDP packages because it's required by Windboat, and stumbled upon one that did end up working, and then after a few days, their computer is now locked up with ransomware.
Yeah.
Right. So it turns out not actually quite true at all. It wasn't FreeRDP.
Or Windboat.
Exactly. Yeah. So pretty quickly after the claim, the initial claim, those so the FreeRDP PPA is still down as we record this. Not the official FreeRDP PPA, the bespoke one. So we've got an article that should have passed up on the screen by now, and if you're in the audio version, we have a link to that article where you can go find the PPA in question. But it is still down as of the recording. So their reputation is at least slightly tarnished.
Or they're not going to show back up again. Yeah, because they're feeling shame.
Yeah, well, Launchpad doesn't trust them, and I guess that's, I mean, in a situation like this, I can see why.
Yep, I can see why you take it down, yeah.
But the files in the PPA were thrown into VirusTotal, and we got nothing back. So that happened pretty quickly.
Several researchers have poked at this and not found anything, essentially.
Right. So we can be 99.9% sure that it had nothing to do with FreeRDP or any of the offshoots of the FreeRDP PPA that was serving up FreeRDP. It doesn't look like it was FreeRDP at all. But yet FreeRDP seemed to have gotten all the flack on this.
And I'll also say that the original poster who had the problems has since said, I'm very sorry for all of the backlash that has happened.
Whoops.
It turns out it wasn't that at all. So, but the damage is done.
Right. So as Dan and I were digging into this, it started to look more like not an individual application error and more foot gun.
Yeah. And maybe the way the defaults are set up.
Right. So the way that Windboat works, which is really, really cool, by the way.
It is cool.
It is. So it's running on top of Docker, and it's a VM. So a Windows VM running inside of a Docker container on top of Linux. And it's got to be rootful.
Yeah, which makes total sense because it's a VM inside, so it's virtual machine inside containerization. So it makes sense that you need a root access to do those things because it's nested.
Right. Exactly. But as you start poking around, you realize that by default, if you've ever brought up a Docker container, you would likely know that by default, Docker listens globally on all of your ports and all of your IPs.
Yeah, whatever you have available. Yeah.
Yeah, for connections to that container, whatever that container might be, right? So you bring up a web server. The web server is available to anybody and everybody, local or not.
Right.
And that's pretty much what happens here as well. So as you start digging and the details start flowing, you realize that this person not only was running Windboat, which is Windows, like a real version of Windows essentially on their Linux machine. This Linux machine had a publicly exposed IP. And if you put two and two together, what I was talking about before, Windboat runs in Docker. Docker listens globally by default. If there's no firewall or additional configuration preventing this global listening, that means Windows, you're essentially stripped down. Windboat is a stripped down version of Windows that just runs the application. But this stripped down version of Windows is, at least in this person's case, on the internet.
Yeah, out on the internet with nothing in between. Nothing in between.
Oh, no.
Yeah, bad.
And then it becomes quickly apparent what really happened. How ransomware infected this person's Linux machine. It doesn't look like it was FreeRDP.
And it doesn't seem like it's Windboat necessarily, just the fact that, it was out there.
Right. I mean, I guess you could argue that Windboat is shipping an unsecure-ish version of Windows. Like, I guess you could make that argument, but...
So really, if you're going to make this, if you're running it locally on your machine, I would just make it so it listened to your local machine, right? So 127.0.0.1, so that, it only accepted incoming connections from the machine itself. And then, anything from the external wouldn't hit it, and you'd be all set. That's exactly a real easy fix. But as Leo pointed out, you might want to be able to do this remotely from another machine,
right?
So if you're doing that, then I think you gotta learn how to finagle the Docker networking stuff so that you could scope it to a certain subnet or something so that it only existed on your local LAN, perhaps, or something like that.
But this is why this right here, like what you just said,
that's a lot. That's a lot.
This is exactly why it's a foot gun, right? This is exactly why you're going to blow your feet off when you try to use something like this and you just happen to be connected.
Like you don't even have like a NAT firewall in front of you, like a home router or something. You're just plugged in raw.
Yeah. We do this experiment with Windows boxes, no firewall, no nothing or whatever. You just put them out directly on the internet and just see how long it takes. And it doesn't take very long, especially if you have things like SMBv1 turned on, the original implementation of server message blocker. We call it SIFs now, but the Windows sharing protocol. It doesn't take long, not at all. And this smacks to me of, because you could solve it with a simple configuration change, right? Because as Dan was saying, if you just listen locally, only for connections from the originating machine, essentially 127.0.0.1, right? Home, me, this machine. Mm-hmm. Then you would fix this problem So it kind of it could be changed with a simple configuration on Windboat's side. So it really kind of smacks to me of like setting admin on your router.
Right.
It doesn't have to be this way. You could totally auto-generate a password to fill into there. Sure, keep it admin. That's still not ideal, but you could be in such a better position if your password wasn't also admin. And by enforcing it, by not even giving people the opportunity to oopsie, you are giving them security. You're forcing them to have it, and it's not that bad to have to write down a password and stick it under your router or something like that, right?
I would take that a step further and actually force them to change said default that you shipped with the thing. Like even if you put a label on it, it's got admin garbledy-gook password, and then force them to change that on first login. I think that would take it yet another step.
Yeah, because how many times have we heard of, oh, well, it turns out that the random number generator that you had wasn't actually random, and we can totally guess the randomized password just if we know what time you generated your password. Ha! Well, right, by forcing the password change, Dan, that's not an issue.
Yeah, I don't think I don't think the random thing is a bad place to start, but just absolutely force something else.
Yes. I mean, it's a huge step up, right? And this is the same way. So Windboat is the same way, where if you just forced it to listen to local connections only, you would never run into this problem.
Right.
That we didn't know was a problem, granted, right? Like, who does that?
I mean, I guess this is a way to find out.
This person, right? Like, obviously. So bugs you didn't know you needed to fix, right? Of course. Yep. But now that we know that local listening is really, really paramount here, and you could fix a whole slew of issues that come along with it. So the other way to deal with these things, Dan, you mentioned the firewall. So
yeah, that's great. So in Linux, like most distributions, they actually don't enable the firewall out of the gate. But I mean, I think that's a pretty easy way to solve this problem too. Your host system, if you turned on I'm assuming it's Debian or Ubuntu, right? So UFW is an option there. It comes in pre-installed. All you need to do is enable it and job done, fixed there too. And that'll probably prevent you from getting all sorts of other things, not just things that are happening to Windboat, right?
Exactly. But I think so the real difficulty in fixing these kinds of things, right, at least on the user side, is again why they're called foot guns, is that the user has to, number one, know that these are issues, that these are, I could get knocked over like this, or this potentially could happen, and that would be really, really bad. So of course, number one is the education part, which do we really, really spend a lot of time when you're shown a cool, flashy Windboat thing that lets you run your Windows applications? Your first thought is not, well, let's dig into its security footprint and actually see what kinds of things I might run into. No, it's, oh my God, Windows apps on my, let's go. And it's already installed and you put it on the public internet. Whoops. So,
And like, this is very likely someone that's a refugee from like Windows 10 or something, right? They're trying to get off of the Windows and onto Linux. So,
and then boom, ransomware.
What kind of service did we do for them, right? Because we didn't teach them how to be safe. It's like Norm Abrams used to say in the New Yankee Workshop. Every episode when he started off, he said, "Let's take a minute to talk about shop safety."
Yeah,
which is good before you go turning on the power tools, right?
You put your goggles on and make sure your saw stop is working.
Exactly.
Yeah, but right, again, I think computers don't feel like table saws, so it's very easy to just be like, double click, pipe to bash here and whatever, and you end up
sudo pipe to bash. Let's go.
right. And the famous Linus one, when it Linus where he installed Pop! OS and then installed Steam, and then it was like, delete your desktop.
The whole thing. Right. Just take it right out, rip it out.
Right. So I guess this is more of a plea to Windboat. Make this change.
It's simple enough. Yep.
Put a checkbox or something in, or a question in the installation process, where it says, do you want this to listen publicly? And
Right,
you
right.
could go back and check that box. If for some reason you decide you need to listen globally, not publicly, but globally, then okay, cool. But let that be a conscious choice, right? So
Yeah.
remove a foot gun from
Yeah, a little
from
bit.
this
Yep.
situation. Yeah, that would be, I think, the ideal
That's
way.
a good
Because
step.
otherwise, you're asking users to, learn a little bit about Docker and why it does by default, why it listens globally by default, and then how to actually change that default listening behavior so that it only listens locally. No, you're already way too far off into the weeds. Ain't
Yeah.
nobody got time for that. So yeah, quick config change, I think, would solve
help.
this
It would help.
altogether. It's really cool though.
I'm kind of interested. I don't know. I mean, I don't run a lot of Windows things, but I got a couple of apps that kind of could be helpful. Yeah.
I want to see how good it actually is. So that's one thing that I didn't do. Yeah. Well, see, I would imagine the performance is near native. I know it's in a VM. Windboat runs Windows, a stripped down version of Windows in a VM inside of a container. So obviously there's overhead, but the container overhead will be very minimal. And the VM overhead, I don't imagine would be
not too bad.
Huge. I didn't look in to see what kind of hypervisor they use. Like how are they running the VM inside of the container is an interesting question that I don't have an answer to right now, but I'll be digging into later. Because that would give you a better idea of what the VM overhead would actually look like. But even at a 20% overhead, right, you're only getting 80% of the performance out of it. I still think that's going to be more than enough for most people to be able to say.
You're only running one app. So, I mean, it might not be so bad.
Right. Exactly. I mean, and that was me being not generous at all, 20%. Because most VMs don't have that much overhead.
No, it seems like a lot, yeah.
Yeah, so I think, I don't know, at least the idea
I'm
of
interested.
this is really cool.
You got me hooked.
Yeah, definitely. So stay tuned. There'll probably be another conversation about Windboat, mostly because I want to follow up and see, does it still listen globally?
Yeah.
So anyway, there was a slightly happy ending to the ransomware story as well. Well, the guy still has ransomware, so you still have to deal with that. But that we found out, I guess, or at least we are mostly convinced that it's just letting Windows onto the internet without a firewall is a very, very bad idea because you'll end up with ransomware on your machine, and that can extend in a case like Windboat's to the underlying Linux system. So everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
So we confirmed what we already knew.
Yeah. So the happy ending is it's not FreeRDP's fault. And I guess the other slightly happy ending is it's not directly 100% Windboat's fault either. And really the point I'm trying to make is Windows sucks. That's the happy ending.
That's pretty good stuff. Yeah.